2022 Lunchbox Speaker Series here at SFCC for our Controlled Environment Ag program. And welcome again. This is our fourth in a series that's just starting, so we're going to see a lot more of these go through the year. We'll be doing more next semester, and each semester we'll add another 6 or so speakers. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to start today with sharing my screen like I usually do and pull up our presentation. It just introduces the subject again of what we're doing. This is our Lunchbox series. We're doing this during a lunchbox time that's kind of convenient, but as you see, many of our speakers have different time zones, and we're hearing from a speaker today who's in the Eastern time zone. So I chose 11 o'clock Mountain Time to be convenient for most people. And we're just going to have industry experts, not just industry, but academia. And the purpose of this seminar is to connect those academia professionals and industry professionals, particularly with my students who are enrolled in my current classes. They get some private Q&A time after the talk today and during these series. And then we will record these. These will be put on YouTube, but my students get a little special connection with these leaders. So let me see, so far we've had a really good series. We've had 3 speakers, and we noted the other day that a lot of our speakers this semester are focused more towards the aquaculture side than the hydroponic side. So we do intend to add some more next semester of our hydroponic growers, vertical farm managers, and leaders in that industry as well. Joe Pate launched us in January, and we're thankful that he was the guinea pig that got us going here. So we've had some great talks, and today we're hearing from Dr. Tidwell, and I'm going to let him give his introduction as he gives his talk. But he was my mentor, one of my many mentors from Kentucky State University, and that's where I'm finishing up my master's degree program. And I have a lot of students currently that are aspiring future researchers or future growers, food producers. And Kentucky State University is probably, I would put it very highly, as one of the best schools in the U.S. that focuses on food production. So whether it's aquaculture through production systems like pond production, ROS systems, or we're indoors in our ROS systems doing aquaponics, Kentucky State's a test bed and a platform for a lot of students to do some very novel research. So we're going to hear about some of that today. And a reminder, some of our upcoming speakers after Dr. Tidwell, to take a couple weeks between the speakers, but we're going to have Rosanna Salinave, who is a co-author of mine on a couple papers. One most popular recently was the decoupled aquaponics paper that we put out through New Mexico State University Cooperative Extension Agency. So Rosanna is going to talk to you about being an extension agent, something Dr. Tidwell knows very well. He may touch base a little bit on how extension fits into a program like his. And in class today, we were talking with students, and one of them had an interest in extension agency. And what's the roadmap? How is it organized? And how do you find your agent? And different topics. There's so many specialties. So we're going to get an education there, and also an education on how to be an extension agent. If you're one of my current students, you know that I encourage students to look into extension as a potential career. You get to work with what you like, whether it's fish or plants, but you get to help farmers. It's a very practical career. And as I mentioned today in one of my classes, the colleagues that you work with are really fascinating, fun people that are out there on the same mission to help spread global food production, or at least in their state. They're focused on their state work. And then later in April, we'll conclude the semester-long series with Justin Henry, who's also an aquaculture pioneer and leader across Canada. And he has been a pioneer in organic production, organic certification of aquaculture. So fish is allowable in Canada. And so with help of people like Justin Henry, we got the laws changed and enforced so we can allow aquaculture production. Within those laws, Justin and I used to look closely, and when you look at aquatic plant certification for organics, it does allow for aquaponic production. It's kind of a play on the words, and looking at the letter of the law, it does fit that definition. I'm not sure that's what Canada intended, and I think they're looking to change their regulations, maybe to disallow what we conventionally call aquaponic crop for organic certification. But currently, again, through leaders like Justin Henry, it is allowable. And Justin Henry also has been a pioneer in sturgeon farming, caviar production, and for a decade plus now, he's done that as a certified organic aquaculture producer. So I'm pretty fascinated to have these people connecting with my students, and I look forward to a whole new schedule in the fall. And then I've got to bring this up every time. I'm always doing this with my students, and those who are watching the YouTube will have this up within maybe a month of these live events. So they should be fairly current. And a reminder to some of my students, because I put on a couple that are student related here this time, is coming up next week. We have a University of Arizona short course summary. It's one of our advanced students. I paid for him to take a 3-day intensive online workshop through University of Arizona. This is a short course I've taught at before. At this course last month, Eric Highfield, who started this program, he was one of the speakers. So what Gabe is going to do is he's going to give a summary of a 3-day intensive workshop for our students. He's going to tell you what a 3-day intensive workshop really is like and what it's like to attend one of those. But we're looking at it in the perspective of a SFCC-CEA student. What did you learn? He's already finished his program. So what did he learn with our faculty based on what he heard in these intensive workshops? Were there things missing that we need to highlight? Or is he going to come back and tell us that we're really doing a bang-up job at training our students in the workforce? Another thing for students particularly is this cleanup. I've adopted a library nearby the high school and nearby our HEC center, and we're going to get together on a Monday between classes, and we're going to clean the courtyard and get it ready for some cultivation with some food crops, and it's right next to the kids' library, so we're going to be involved in that. Also for students and community members, even Dr. Tidwell has an interest in earthships. You're more than welcome to join us on April 30th for a full-day workday at the Earthships in Taos, New Mexico, and we'll be advertising and spreading that wide. Another thing I pulled up today, local, that I want to mention, you all need to be looking at these local conferences that are focused on agriculture, on our water resources. As you know, we focus on energy distribution as well, so energy conferences, and often we host those conferences. But here's one I pulled up today was the Animas and San Juan Watersheds Conference. This is going to be a hybrid virtual or in person, and San Juan's not that far from us. And so it's a great place to network with the leaders in this industry. So if you've been kind of interested in water resources and you want to spawn away maybe from food production and protect our watersheds and get involved in tribal water issues, these are the conferences to network with those professionals. And with your credentials from SFCC or as a current student, we can open doors when we get there. We can help you connect with people that you want to connect with. And then internationally or nationally, Cultivate is our big indoor grow conference that's in Columbus, Ohio every year. I've never been to that, but we certainly need to have a presence there. So let's look at maybe sending a contingent sometime, myself or our greenhouse technicians and some students. INSERA is a group that's a committee based out of the USDA. That's it's comprised of ARS agents or specialists that are focused on indoor technology for indoor vertical farm growing. I would say most of their work is indoor lighting, but all those researchers get together annually, and there's a meeting coming up at Tucson, Arizona, at the University of Arizona Controlled Environment Ag Center, and that's a good place again to network, and we may be involved in that this year. And then importantly is your Aquaponic Association conference. Many of you have heard me talk about that. There's your dates, and if you have independent research with me or Pedro or Steve Gomez, you're welcome to present it there, and we'll be talking a lot more about that. A couple years ago, it was located in Kentucky because Dr. Tidwell has quite a draw with that facility and what's been going on at Kentucky State. And we hope to draw the conference to Santa Fe in probably 2023 or 2024. And then finally, one of the conferences I just attended recently is an Aquaculture America. It's an annual conference. I just went out to San Diego. Many of my students know about that. It's coming up in New Orleans in February. So we really need to motivate with clubs and fundraising if anybody wants to go. Usually the rule is you have to present, but you can co-present with me. I've done that before. We can give our update on the college, or we give an update on one of your research projects. So think about this moving forward, doing some more independent research so you can make it to a conference like that with me. What really stuck out this last conference a couple weeks ago in San Diego was the presence of Kentucky State University. I always give Jim Tidwell credit for that. He built this program to what it is today. When I saw the group photo, I was really amazed at the kind of diverse, broad spectrum, and he's going to talk to you about the diverse programs there. But there's a contingent there, including me as a graduate student finishing up. So a lot of specialists at those meetings are from Kentucky State, and if you get involved in that program, you're instantly connected with the world of aquaculture. All right, so the way I say this, let's open up the lunchbox. I'm going to stop sharing now and let Jim Tidwell give us a talk. Dr. Tidwell, let me stop sharing, and you should be able to share away. I'm sure with this year or two of COVID, you know how to share screens and unshare screens. And
yeah, I told you
until I say that.
I've done many Zooms, but somebody else is usually running them, and I'm.
Let me check. Actually, let me check my screen. I may have to hit a button over here. Okay. All right. Now, I've got a little different version on viewing your screen here. Charles, and everybody, that's Charles Weibel. I'm glad he stepped in so I can give him credit. I often like to give Charles credit because he's the man behind the scenes at Kentucky State University. Jim's going to talk to you about online programming. This is the man that helps do it all. Thank you, Charles. Charles Weibel, everybody.
We got him here.
All right, and I'm going to drop out while you give your presentation, Dr. Tidwell. Thank you very much for your time.
Well, anywhere in here, Charlie, I've tried to take your guidance on what you wanted to cover, so feel free to ask leading questions or interject so that we cover what you want these guys to be caught up on, not just in KSU, but overall.
Great, and I'll just remind you, if you could stop at about 1:50 your time, I'll stop the recording, and then we'll have about 10 minutes with students.
Okay, about 1:50.
Yes, sir.
Gotcha. Okay, appreciate it. Well, one thing Charlie asked that I talk a little bit about how I came to be in this field, in this profession, and how I did it without getting too many thousands or hundreds of $1,000s of loans. My own background came from a very small town in Alabama. Grew up working in a service station. My mom and dad, neither one went to college, so I don't come from a big academic background. I'm what they call a first-generation college student. I came through it roundabout way. After the service station, worked in body shops. I was an iron worker. I worked as a production welder and in auto parts. And I thought when I was working there that not sure I wanted to do this for the next 50 years or so. So that's when I started, while I was working full time, started to take some classes in the evenings while working full time. Those classes, I was working in Birmingham, Alabama, which was the next big town over from where I grew up. I went to University of Alabama, Birmingham. What you see is UAB, which is actually bigger than the Tuscaloosa campus these days. I majored in biology. UAB was a major medical facility and now is actually the largest employer in the city of Birmingham. Took some marine science classes. Thought that's what I wanted to do till I found out I got deathly seasick out on the boats. So I changed over to more a freshwater type approach. I worked at Southern Research Institute as a co-op student while going to school full time. While I was there, I got on their educational programs. They would pay your tuition if you would continue your education. Again, this is in the vein of how did I get, and I got all the way through my PhD with no loans. So there, one of the things Charlie said is show that there is a way to do this and not on borrowed money, and I did that. So Southern Research Institute actually paid for my my master's classes while I was working again full-time. So I never was really a full-time student till I went to work on my doctorate. I worked jobs, usually full-time jobs, and went to school part-time as a way to make the finances work. So when I finished up my master's while working at Southern Research Institute, I knew I didn't want to work in the labs anymore. I wanted to do something more outside. So when I finished up my master's while working there, the thesis research I had done while working full-time, I went and did my research on weekends and evenings, and I worked in stream fish ecology. I worked on darters. I started to do some work with spawning grass carp. It was hopefully going to be a thesis project. Didn't work out, but that's where I learned to appreciate and got excited about working in aquaculture. So after I finished up my master's, I applied to Auburn, I applied to Mississippi State, got accepted at both, but Mississippi State had a better package. A lot of people don't realize that when you get to graduate level studies in the hard sciences, you usually can get a research assistantship. So when I went to Mississippi State, I was on a paid research assistantship, and I lived in the fish hatchery, that bottom picture that you see right there. I had an apartment that's not as big as what my office is now, but it was paid for. So I was able to go through my doctorate and my PhD again without taking any loans. So I've got 3 degrees and no loans, and that's a pretty good equation to end up with. So as I was finishing up my doctorate, I applied for several jobs. I'd forgotten I had applied for one at KSU. I heard from them about a year later when I heard from Kentucky State University. To be honest, I didn't even remember that I had submitted an application there. So we came around. My wife and Vicki and I came up and looked at it and decided this was a good place to come and stay for a couple of years and move on to a bigger university. And that couple of years has turned into 34, almost 35 now. And it passes quicker than you'd ever imagine. So they had started this program in about 1985 at Kentucky State. It was kind of a spinoff. There's consultants from Auburn University came up and set up the initial programs. I came in '87. A couple people had already been here. Michael Masser was doing extension, and Michael Creamer was predecessor in research. Creamer had moved on to and was working in China. So when I came, I continued work I had been doing at Mississippi State University. I did a lot of catfish work. As worked through that work, realized that maybe there were fish that might be a better fit for the cooler conditions in Kentucky compared to, say, Mississippi or Alabama. And I started looking at alternative species of different types, and then continued to look at work I'd done in Mississippi on nutrition and feed development and use of alternative feed ingredients, which in Kentucky were things like distillery byproducts and things like that. So the growth of the program that Charlie refers to and my own tenure here at Kentucky State, when I came in '87, although I was right out of school, I came in as the lead scientist, what they call the program area coordinator. And what that meant, as I was the only PhD working in research in the Kentucky State's aquaculture program. We had one person in extension, that was Michael Masser, one person in research, and that was me. So title changes, some responsibilities changed. After Masser left, I was responsible for research and extension. And then in the late 90s, mid to late 90s, we developed our first academic offerings. So I was now in charge of research, extension, and academics. So we've grown the program from really what was basically a federally co-located research program on campus to now it's a school under the College of Agriculture, and really the whole College of Agriculture grew out of us teaching those initial courses in aquaculture because there were no ag-related courses taught at the time. While working at KSU and in the research side and the academic side also, and this is something related to what Charlie was talking about, I would encourage you to get involved with professional societies. The ones I've spent the most time in have been U.S. Aquaculture Society, which is really a chapter of the World Aquaculture Society. Those are contacts, it's network. Everybody says, well, it's not what you know, it's who you know. Well, if you have both, if you know what you're talking about and you have contacts in the industry and in the university systems, there's an awful lot of good people that you can collaborate with, that you can work with and help you grow your program, but also grow your career. So it may not be one of these societies. There's a lot more specific to horticulture or aquaponics, and but it's a great way to get involved and get contacts and network in your profession. Again, we continued to grow the program. We developed undergraduate office offerings. In the late 90s, we moved into online learning. So when COVID hit a couple years ago, we were better prepared than most because we had already been teaching online courses for over 20 years. So we have and have had a significant number of offerings of courses online. We grew the academic side of the program now. We had research pretty well nailed down. We had extension offerings, and we continued to grow the academics. First course was taught in 91. We were able to offer a minor under the biology program in 92. Offered a master's by 98. In 99, we were named by the state of Kentucky as KSU's Program of Distinction. And for the first time, we started to get real state funds. And what we did with that is set up the technologies and things to begin to do distance learning. And we've offered our first online course then in 2000. So that's 22 years that we've been teaching online courses in aquaculture. So what is this big aquaculture side of things? And as Charlie said, well, a lot of you guys interested in the aquaponics side. A lot of the early folks, and it's still my background, I come at it from more the aquaculture side, the fish side. So I tend to work still with a lot of fin fish. Some with aquaponics, although we've kind of spun that off, and Janelle Hager is doing most of the outreach and a lot of the research on the aquaponics side. But what does aquaculture look like past and future tense here? A big driver of the demand for fish, which is driving a lot of the increase in aquaculture, has been population growth. You can see this graph of what a spike of human population looks like, and we're over 7 billion now, and that's estimated to be approaching 10 billion by 2050. The big numbers that feed back to us is every time we add one person, we've got to come up with 45 pounds of fish per year to meet the consumption, per capita consumption of each one of those people of each year of their life. So the demand for fish follows along this population growth line. Most people, especially here in Kentucky, when we ask, okay, where does our protein come from? Where does our animal source protein come from? People here would answer beef, or they'd answer chicken, or they'd answer pork. Actually, already seafood provides the majority or the largest proportion of animal source proteins for the human population. So most people would not, in the U.S., would not immediately respond that seafood was, on a worldwide basis, such an important source of animal source proteins for humans. And the trends are that will actually increase and continue to increase. If we look at these FAO projections for beef production, pork production, poultry, and seafood, you can see that beef is expected to actually gradually decline in the next 20 years or so coming up. Pork is flatly increasing. Poultry is increasing, but if you see, seafood is already larger and is increasing as rapidly or more rapidly than any of the other sources of animal proteins for the human diet here. Where do we get our seafood? Well, historically, it's come from capture fisheries. If we needed more fish, we just needed a bigger boat or a faster boat or a boat that could go further out to sea. We thought the ocean was a limitless resource. They were out there to be caught. We just had to have the technology to catch them. However, we've reached maximum sustainable yields on many or most of those fisheries. That's what we call a commercial population of fish out there. So the projections for capture fisheries are basically to be stable, but not really significant increases in the coming years. So the red line you see is we were able to go and catch more into the 1990s, but then after that it's stabilized. It's not really increasing. The blue line is production by aquaculture or fish farming, and you can see it's on a run there with a bullet. It's a rocket on its way up and expected to continue to do that for the next few decades. So aquaculture is the world's fastest growing animal food production activity and is expected to remain so for at least 20, 30, maybe 40 years in the future. How will we do that? That's the big question. A lot of that's still being figured out. This is a relatively young way of producing food, especially on a industrial commercial scale. Aquaculture has been around for a long time, but not as a large scale activity. Really, the science of aquaculture only goes back 50, 60 years. So a very young profession, a very young database of science to draw on here. So here in Kentucky, we don't have a lot of water, but we've got a lot of grass. So when I'm doing extension type talks here and people are saying, well, how big a deal can this aquaculture thing really be? I didn't drive by fish ponds as I came to this talk this morning. I show them this graph that shows that aquaculture actually passed beef production 10 years ago in terms of overall production. And that's continued to increase. That gap, it just gets wider every year. And in some ways, that's probably a good thing. And we'll talk about why that is in the next couple of slides here. So the big shortages that are predicted to be coming up in the future by the Food and Agriculture Organization are two biggies: are nutrients and clean, fresh water that we can use. So if we have a limited supply of nutrients, whether they be fertilizers or feedstuffs, we need to get the most impact. We need to get the most human food out of that nutrient input that we can. So what are the most efficient converters of feed that we deal with in our major animal groups and animal crops? So how many pounds of feed does it take to produce 1 pound of gain in these different farm animals here? These are big round numbers. They vary by breed, by feed input. But in general, cattle, it takes about 10 pounds of feed to produce 1 pound of gain. Pigs, it's about 3.5 pounds of feed. Chickens, about 2 pounds of feed to get 1 pound of gain. Fish, 1.5 pounds. A lot of that is the basic physiology of fish. Some of the basic physiology, they're cold-blooded, so they don't burn energy to keep warm. They have a completely different system to detoxify and excrete their waste products. It's much more efficient than these other land animals. So fish are the most efficient converters of feed among our farm animals. The other shortage we're looking at is potable water. This one is a bit counterintuitive. As far as consuming water to produce 1 pound of weight gain, cattle, it takes about 1,800 gallons of water to produce a pound of gain. Pigs, about 720. Chickens, over 500 gallons. Fish, only about 350. Again, that seems counterintuitive, but this is consumption. Fish live in water, but think of a recirculating system. They're not using that water up. That water is getting cleaned and reused. The only water loss is what comes out in that fish's body when he's harvested. So as far as consumption and consumptive numbers related to pounds of gain, fish are again much more efficient than these other farm animals. What about CO2 emissions? What about impact, carbon impact on those? So if you look at this is CO2 emissions by different protein sources per gram of protein generated. Again, you can see that beef cattle are one of the least efficient and most impactful in this particular situation in terms of CO2 emissions. As you go down the line, you can see that pork and poultry, wild fisheries actually produces more CO2 than aquaculture. Think of those big diesel-powered boats going out for weeks at a time to harvest wild fisheries. So aquaculture, as far as environmental impact, is a very low impact producer of protein for human consumption. So let's look at aquaculture in again some worldwide terms, and now we'll narrow it down to what does the U.S. look like in terms of seafood consumption, seafood production, and the balance between those two. Well, the U.S. is the world's largest importer of seafood. Well over 90% of the seafood consumed in the United States is imported. So if you go back there to the grocery store and you go to the seafood counter and you look in the little window, it's about a 9 out of 10 chance that came from some other country. We do produce, we do export, but the imbalance between those two is our trade deficit. And in 2019, that deficit in seafood alone was over $17 billion more that we spent than we brought in our production and wild fisheries commerce. since we get such a huge proportion of our seafood from overseas, and a lot of that comes from countries that really don't even like us all that much, food safety is a big concern and should be. And these big refrigerated containers come in on these containerized cargo ships, and very little, less than 2% of it gets inspected for any kind of contaminants, quite often to even ensure that it's seafood in those cargo containers. So that's a big doorway into our food supply that we would do well to produce more and within our domestic production and consumption. So where's all that seafood coming from? China is the biggest producer, aquaculture producer, producing almost 2/3 of the world's aquaculture production in that one country. We add in a couple of other nearby Asian countries near to China, almost 90% of aquaculture production is occurring in China. So that is where that imbalance is so imbalanced. We really need to try to address that, and that's a lot about what our program at Kentucky State University is trying to do. Even if we put that context of all that seafood being produced on the other side of the world, how does that affect other environmental concerns? What are the spin-off impacts of producing all that so far away? In the U.S., the most common number that gets thrown around for food miles, how far has your food traveled before it made it to the plate and you ate it? The big general round number that gets tossed around the most is about 1,500 miles is the average number. However, seafood coming from Asia has traveled over 6,000 miles. So it literally has come halfway around the world to come into our markets. Even with those shipping costs, we find it hard to compete economically with China and some of the close around Asian countries. So what we've concentrated on in our production and our marketing is what can those producers not generate and ship into our market. So those are things like fresh seafood, all that's frozen, and even live seafood. So we've concentrated on local production, but also local markets, farm to table, farm to consumer, farmers market type markets, and shorten that chain to be as close a link between the producer and the consumer as we possibly can. Our facility at KSU, this is an aerial photo here. We have 33 ponds, 24 microcosm ponds, nutrition. This is now our aquaponics greenhouse, what had been, and we continue to develop additional facilities. Our most recent construction is looking at alternative production technologies and genetics. The Aquaculture Production Technologies building. If you look, the red arrow down there in the left, that's the infamous Charlie Schultz working on building our first replicated aquaponics system down there when he was here and needed a system to do his research, and we've continued to use that same system today. So new types of production, but also new species to produce, species that are better suited for our climate, species that better suited to indoor recirculating type environments as well. The people that don't have a strong background in aquaculture, or maybe only have worked in one system, think that system is the most important system. But really, worldwide, most fish production still occurs in mud bottom ponds. Ponds are still the bread and butter of aquaculture production. It's not glamorous, it's not fancy, but it's the most economical way of producing fish if you have the proper resources. Charlie asked about touching on where future jobs may be. I don't have a crystal ball much better than anybody else's, but there's a lot of ways of raising fish. And in the time I've been involved with aquaculture, there's been some major changes in how fish are raised and where the emphasis is. I'd have to say in our own federal support, the push early on was into pond systems. In recent years, we're seeing more and more resources and federal research dollars going into marine systems, these sea cages, offshore cages. And there's a lot of debate right now about opening up leases to produce those and where. But the other thing has been, recirculating aquaculture, especially intensive, was something that was being discussed, but they were strictly experimental. Now you're seeing these huge salmon production facilities. They're actually moving out of these ocean cages and into onshore recirculating systems. So as far as where the jobs are, it's hard to predict. What I would say is learn aquaculture, learn the fundamentals of aquaculture, learn how all these systems work, and you have the flexibility to move into different systems as the world changes and the production systems change along with it. That's what I say about future jobs is it's like evolution, stay flexible. Within our program, we have a number of different emphasis areas and a number of different researchers. We're doing quite a bit of work in biofloc production of saltwater shrimp. Dr. Ray has this down, very reproducible numbers, significant numbers, and he has probably 6 or 8 of these systems going in commercial production and small farms around Kentucky right now. Dr. Boris Gamelski is our geneticist. A lot of the aquatic crops that we work with are basically still wild animals. A lot have not even been domesticated, much less genetically improved or selected for maximum disease resistance or growth. We're not talking about genetically modified, just using molecular biology tools to more efficiently select for promising strains that produce well. Dr. Valdemar Rossi is our aquaculture nutritionist. We're production agriculture, basically. We're in the business of turning feed into flesh. So nutrition research is always a foundation of efficient, economical aquaculture production. And Dr. Rossi is building an excellent program, and that's an area of interest of mine and quite a few grad students that come to our program. Dr. Ken Simmons is working on new systems to better use existing resources, these in-pond raceways, which can take a pond that's used more extensively and intensify the production within that pond and use the natural abilities of the pond to produce oxygen and process waste and do it more intensively and easier to harvest, easier to treat in these in-pond raceway systems. Dr. Bob Durbrow is an extension specialist and also runs our disease diagnostic lab. Fish and shrimp, like any farm animal, gets sick. We have to know what it is and how to treat them. That's a free service that Kentucky State provides to our producers and actually to several states around us that don't have this resource. One of our newer faculty is Dr. Noel Novello. Noel actually got his master's here, went to LSU, got his doctorate, and has come back to us and is now on our faculty. He's working in tilapia genetics, looking at growth and color, and also has an extension appointment to work with the farmers and transfer these technologies out to our private producers. My research has been in what I'd call alternative species. I've worked a lot over the years with freshwater prawns, hybrid bluegills. Recent years worked on largemouth bass. Our environment is very good for producing largemouth bass. Kentucky produces over 100,000 pounds a year. We don't need a processing plant. They go live to Asian markets. Catfish bring maybe $1 a pound. The largemouth bass brings $6 a pound live weight. They write you a check on the pond bank, no processing plant, and that is very advantageous. Recent years, we branched out into aquaponics. Brought in Charlie to really help us boot up that area. Aquaponics is a bit different here. We have a long, cold winter. So if you say in a greenhouse type situation, it can be very cold here for extended period through the winter. Most of our production would likely be in well-insulated buildings so that we don't use too much heating cost during the 3 months of heavy winter, that the heat cost would really be absorbent. So if you go inside an insulated building, you've lost your natural light. So a lot of the work that we've done has been looking at what types of lights work best, and then progressing through a number of those studies to narrow in on LEDs, and then within the LEDs, some of the color balances, and from that we've moved into evaluating some fairly low-cost LED lights that were not specifically designed for horticulture use, but certainly not aquaponics use, but even to grow plants. And let's look at those and see if they can efficiently be used at much lower purchase prices than some of these custom-made, dedicated horticulture grow lights. Kind of start to wind down specific to KSU and our offerings. Again, we've been offering online courses for over 20 years. We have principles, genetics, fish disease, reproduction, production methods, water quality, and aquaponics course that Janelle finished up just 2-3 years ago. We've had over 1,200 students take our online courses, and they've come to us from 40 different states, and we've actually had online students from 30 countries around the world. So we have the largest offering of online aquaculture courses of any aquaculture program in the United States. And like I said, that served us well during COVID because we already had full capabilities to continue offering our courses online even when we couldn't come into the classrooms. We offer a certificate degree, and that requires 12 hours of our AQU labeled aquaculture courses. It can be completed entirely online. We recently launched a graduate version for people that already have a degree, can get a graduate certificate in aquaculture and aquatic sciences. We don't offer a standalone bachelor's degree within our Ag, Food, and Environment baccalaureate. We have an option where you concentrate on aquaculture systems, getting your overall degree in Ag, Food, and the Environment with an option in aquaculture systems. And then we've long offered the master's degree, and most of our students that come to us get a research assistantship, which feeds back to what Charlie was asking about affordability, which means if while you're doing your couple years of graduate work, you're our employee and we pay you a research assistantship while you study half-time and work half-time. That's what I wanted to cover. We'll get to the question and answer portion here in a minute, but I think we're pretty close to on time here.
You are, and thank you, Dr. Tidwell. Thanks for that inspirational speech. You always have quotes that stick out to me, and sometimes they come into my own teaching, all the double-edged sword stuff, and all my students know what that means. There's always an alternate side to the story. But one thing that stood out there was the 3 degrees with no loans, and that's a good equation, everybody. Think about what you did. I kind of plowed through this myself. When I met Dr. Tidwell, I had a wife and a young kid, and I had decided to leave the Caribbean to make a change. And I was looking around for work. 10 years ago, there wasn't a lot of aquaponic jobs out there. There's still, you know, as he talked about, where are the jobs? You got to create them. So to be well-rounded is a good idea. But the stars aligned and we found ourselves together. And I would say Dr. Tidwell and I created something pretty special there for the U.S. aquaponics especially. Let me go ahead. What we're going to do is we're going to stop recording. We're going to have a little private time, have a few Q&A. I know my students have some comments, and if not, I definitely have some things that stood out to me. So everybody, again, I'm stopping recording. This would be the 4th speaker series on March 31st, 2022, and we'll see you at the next one, everybody.